Have somebody that's involved in something have the ability to put a kibosh on it.
So then
How do you know? So you're making a direct assertion that you believe the current president of the United States, the most vetted politician in the history of this country in the year of our Lord 2025, you think there's secret information that has never come to light, even though we had Democrats in charge and law enforcement agencies chasing him all over for the last several years, that somehow is still a secret?
Hey there, welcome to MN News Channel, where we watch CNN, so you don't have to. Last week, Scott Jennings took his usual seat on Newsnight with Abby Phillip, and the topic, the Epstein client list, Pam Bondi's response, and of course, Dan Bongino. Scott Jennings has seen it all. So when the liberal panel started tossing around wild theories, playing defense for Epstein's circle, and smearing anyone to the right of Bernie Sanders, he didn't really flinch. Tiffany Cross, yes, that Tiffany Cross, the disgraced former MSNBC host, actually called Dan Bongino a right-wing extremist who floats conspiracy theories. That pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how low this panel is willing to sink to protect their narrative. Anyway, let's watch Scott Jennings massacre this herd of morons.
Red meat to the MAGA base.
The questions surrounding this alleged suicide are numerous.
Yeah.
And are worth entertaining and worth getting to the bottom of quickly. I think Jeffrey Epstein may have some videotape of people central to the Democrat and maybe Republican Party doing some things, let's just say, they shouldn't be doing. Why was the CIA director meeting with Jeffrey Epstein? Listen, that Jeffrey Epstein story is a big deal. Please do not let that story go. Keep your eye on this. I'm not ever going to let this story go because of what I heard from a source about Bill Clinton on a plane with Jeffrey Epstein. I talked about it yesterday. You can go check it out. I'm not letting it go ever.
Joining us at the table is National Trial Attorney Dante Mills, who's a civil and criminal attorney and law professor at Temple University's Beasley School of Law. I also should disclose that Arthur Aidala, our friend here, is the attorney for Ghislaine Maxwell, who's a part of the Epstein universe. Let me start really quickly, though, on the politics of this all, because we played a little bit from Turning Point USA, but there were several speakers, Scott, who went up there and lambasted this administration, and they also suggest very specifically that they wanted Pam Bondi gone and Dan Bongino to stay. So is that what's going on here?
Well, it's true that in some corners of the president's coalition, there is a lot of anger and a lot of interest in this. It's also true that in other corners of the president's coalition and the greater electorate, that they care more about bigger issues, immigration, economy, what have you. But you can't deny what you're hearing in some of these crowds and in some of, conservative media. My only advice for all of this would be, A, I like Dan Bongino. I hope he doesn't resign. I think it was a good pick and defended it when he made it, and I hope he stays in his job. B, internal drama and internal division, just as a former White House staffer, it's a headache for a president, and it can derail, the larger successes. And right now, I think Trump's having a lot of successes, whether it's on the economy or other fronts. So this right here, like whatever happens, needs to happen, and it needs to happen quickly because the division needs to stop.
Well, if it's up to Laura Loomer, who's been running personnel at the White House from the outside for the last few months, she's gotten a lot of people fired so far. She has said pretty clearly, fire scam Blondie. And she also tweeted tonight, or put up on X, I love it when a plan comes together. She also speculated, perhaps, if Blondie is fired, I'm told Ron DeSantis has been considered floated for the attorney general role over the last few months. You can't discount it, because Laura Loomer actually apparently is a very powerful figure in this administration.
And that is the most bizarre part about all of this, that we are discussing this as though it's normal, as though this crazy right-wing extremist conspiracy theorist is running personnel at the White House, that we're discussing as though it's normal that Dan Bongino, who was also a conspiracy theorist, who was a birther, who said his entire goal was to own the libs. I don't know what that means, but it's some asinine statement made by right-wing extremists. I have no idea what any of this means. He is the deputy director of the FBI. Even outside of the Epstein files, if this were a normal time, if this were a normal news cycle, I would be all about the Epstein files. Yes, we need to know. But they dangled this out there as bloody meat for their base, and now that they're cannibalizing, it is a good time. You think I care that Dan Bongino is leaving the FBI?
Let's ask the question,
he is
Arthur.
A crazy person.
Arthur,
he has no business being there.
So now we've got Tiffany Cross. Yes, that Tiffany Cross. Once again proving why MSNBC had to cut ties with her. Tiffany Cross just called Dan Bongino a conspiracy theorist. Seriously? That's rich coming from Tiffany Cross, who built her entire career on peddling far-left talking points straight from the Democratic echo chamber. Let's break this down. Tiffany Cross says Dan Bongino pushes conspiracy theories. You mean like when the FBI was accused of spying on Donald Trump? And the Department of Justice later confirmed that, yes, there were surveillance abuses? That conspiracy theory turned out to be reality. Or how about the COVID-19 lab leak theory? Remember when Democrats and mainstream outlets like CNN and the New York Times swore it was misinformation? Now, even those same outlets have had to quietly admit the lab leak hypothesis might actually be true. And let's not forget the Hunter Biden laptop story, the one CNN, the New York Times, and MSNBC all dismissed as Russian disinformation. The Twitter files exposed the truth. It was Hunter Biden's real laptop all along, so every single time the corporate media labels something a conspiracy theory, it's really just their way of burying uncomfortable facts. Now Tiffany Cross calls Dan Bongino extreme? Give me a break. Dan Bongino is a former NYPD officer, a former Secret Service agent, and a conservative commentator who's earned his audience through service and integrity. Meanwhile, Tiffany Cross once called Florida the you-know-what of the country. That's the level of class we're dealing with here. And when Tiffany Cross pretends she doesn't understand what own the libs means, come on. Own the libs is a simple expression. It means exposing the hypocrisy of the radical left. But notice how CNN and the Democratic pundits never question violent slogans like resist or punch a Nazi. Apparently, when it's coming from the left, it's activism. When it's coming from conservatives, it's dangerous. That double standard is exactly why Americans are tuning out CNN in record numbers. So once again, Tiffany Cross and CNN throw around buzzwords like conspiracy theory to discredit Dan Bongino. But the receipts show otherwise. Every theory they mocked ended up being true. And every time they scream extremism, it's just projection.
Is based on. And when you have right now what's happening is somebody who was in the orbit of Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump. He put the kibosh on the investigation and said, I've decided I didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing to see here. How dare you even continue to talk about this?
So you think that this is about Donald Trump being
I think this is about Donald Trump. We can argue about Bongino or Bondi.
But here's the other argument that people have made.
Because he told her to.
People have made the argument, then why wouldn't Biden have tried to nail Trump on this if his name was on some kind of list?
We don't know where the investigation went or if this is a list. I've had clients as a criminal defense attorney that did, in fact, keep lists because they wanted to protect themselves and they knew that was their ace in the hole. We don't know that. But what I'm saying is,
I think the argument.
Absolutely. But there has to be a check and balance where you can't have somebody that's involved in something have the ability to put a kibosh on it.
So then
how do you know? So you're making a direct assertion that you believe the current president of the United States, the most vetted politician in the history of this country in the year of our Lord 2025, you think there's secret information that has never come to light, even though we had Democrats in charge and law enforcement agencies chasing him all over for the last several years, that somehow is still a secret? Like there's secret information that we don't know about Donald
I'm not
Trump?
saying that's true, but what I'm saying is,
no, you just
you don't
asserted
leave
that
the
you
person
said in the
who it
orbit
may be
directly
true
involved
about to decide that. You don't leave Donald
Well,
Trump.
It's a pretty big assertion.
Maxwell is serving 20 years for trafficking minors. Trafficking them? To whom? You don't get convicted of trafficking to no one. That's like convicting a drug dealer but pretending there were never any buyers. It doesn't add up, and every American knows it. Now, as for Donald Trump, let's clear something up. The corporate media has spent years trying to connect Donald Trump to every conspiracy imaginable. But if Donald Trump were truly involved, do you honestly think the Democrat-run media machine would have stayed silent? If CNN, MSNBC, or the New York Times had any proof tying Donald Trump to Epstein's crimes, it would be a 24/7 headline loop. They'd run it into the ground until Election Day. The fact that they haven't tells you everything you need to know. And while the establishment press downplays the Epstein files, we already have the evidence. The flight logs, the court filings, the 2024 unsealings, and even digital records from Epstein's island. Whether there's a single list or not, the government has it all. Names, testimonies, and data that could bring this entire network crashing down. Yet, CNN keeps pretending it's a right-wing obsession. Now, about Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi. Conservatives have been debating their roles lately, but let's take a step back. Dan Bongino, a former Secret Service agent who has dedicated years to uncovering corruption, used to be one of the loudest voices demanding accountability in the Epstein case. Then, suddenly, Dan Bongino seemed to ease off, only to later reignite the fire, calling out hypocrisy inside the system and pushing back against Pam Bondi. It's confusing, right? Something feels off. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, has been under fire lately. Beaucoup. But why the sudden surge of hate toward her? It almost feels coordinated, like social media factions are being nudged to turn one America First voice against another. Could it be that both Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi are being used as political pawns in a much bigger game? One orchestrated by the same forces that have been covering for Epstein's powerful friends all along? Here's where I stand. I still respect both Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi. They've each fought for transparency in their own way. But the truth is, when you challenge entrenched power, you become a target. And it seems both Bongino and Bondi are catching flack for daring to keep the Epstein story alive. So let me ask you, why does CNN treat Epstein like an afterthought? Why does MSNBC laugh off the idea of accountability? Because exposing the Epstein network would destroy the very foundations of their political alliances. The names tied to Jeffrey Epstein aren't just celebrities. They include donors, politicians, and global insiders. In the end, this isn't about left versus right. It's about truth versus corruption. Every American, Republican or Democrat, should want to know who these predators are. And as conservatives, we can't back down just because the establishment calls us conspiracy theorists. They said that about the FBI spying on Donald Trump. They said it about the Hunter Biden laptop. Every theory turned out to be real. So let's stay on this. Keep pressing for answers. Keep asking the hard questions. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. If you're watching this, know that your voice matters. Support this channel, share this.